mom, barely out of my teens, I was the first person to happen on an accident in my home state of Indiana. This was about 25 years ago, and we didn't use car seats or seatbelts very much. So Dad was driving his car, and Mom was sitting next to him, and she was holding their little baby girl. Semi-truck came up behind them after they stalled right in the middle of the interstate. Came up over the hill, didn't have time to stop, smashed into the back end of the car. And when it did that, the little baby girl was thrown out of her mother's arms into the windshield. And I was the first person to arrive on the scene, and so I saw the dad sitting in shock next to the car holding his dying baby girl. And there was nothing that I could do to help her, and she did go on and she passed away. And those feelings of not knowing what to do in a medical emergency really stuck with me and became one of the reasons I went out and I got my nursing degree. After I graduated, I applied at only one hospital, Christ Hospital, on the southwest side of Chicago, because I thought I would be safe from such moral and ethical dilemmas like abortion, because who would think that a hospital named Christ could possibly be involved in such a thing? But I came to work one night and I received two terrible blows. The first was finding out that the hospital was involved in late-term abortions. I had no idea. Been working there in the department for a year, had no idea this was going on around me. The second was finding out that the method of abortion that the hospital used, called induced labor abortion, sometimes resulted in babies being aborted alive. And if they were aborted alive, they were allowed to die without any medical intervention whatsoever. I'm here to tell you that this method of abortion is very popular, it's very prevalent, so you should know what it is. To commit induced labor abortion, a physician inserts a medication into the mother's birth canal up to the cervix. When you're pregnant, your uterus is shaped kind of like a hot air balloon or a light bulb. And at the bottom of this hot air balloon is a cervix, and it's supposed to stay closed until you're about 40 weeks pregnant. And then it opens, and then you push and the baby comes out. This medication, or also a little seaweed sticks called laminaria, they also insert that moisten when they get wet. They open up the cervix. They force a mom to go into premature labor. They expect the moms will deliver between 19, but as late as 28 weeks I saw at Christ Hospital. So when the cervix opens up enough, what happens is, in essence, these babies just fall out of the uterus. And it is anticipated that they will die during the birth process or soon after, but sometimes they live. And after I went public, Christ Hospital admitted to the Chicago Sun-Times that babies live from this procedure anywhere from 10 to 20% of the time. My experience was that they lived anywhere from a few minutes to one lived almost as long as an 8-hour shift. So up to 1 in 5 babies aborted by this method at Christ Hospital were aborted and lived for some time. Now, the reason that this abortion method is becoming more prevalent, and the new CEO of Christ Hospital that replaced my CEO came from a hospital in St. Louis. He said that this was going on in his hospital, so you're not immune. But the reason that this abortion procedure is prevalent is because it's not a surgical abortion. And the pill that they put in costs only 25 cents each, so it's very cheap. Now, if it's not a surgical abortion, that means the doctor doesn't necessarily have to be there when it's going on. He or she can relegate it to nursing staff or residents, and he can be home in bed sleeping or in his office when this is going on. It doesn't have to have anything to do with it. So another reason that this is popular is because moms are getting more tests these days and finding out during their second trimester that they're carrying a baby who is sick. You know, when Sarah Palin ran for president, it became pretty well known that 90% of Down's kids are aborted these days. So second trimester babies are often used to commit eugenic abortions or to kill little babies who are going to be handicapped in some way after they're born, or the doctors don't think that they're going to live. So that's another reason that this abortion method is becoming very popular. So in my hospital, one night a nursing coworker was taking a little baby boy who'd been aborted alive because he had Down syndrome. He'd survived to the soil utility room to die because his parents didn't want to hold him and she didn't have time to hold him that night. And when she told me what she was doing, I couldn't bear the thought of this suffering child dying alone. And so I cradled and I rocked him for the 45 minutes that he lived. He was about the size of my hand. He was between 21 and 22 weeks, so about the size of my hand, weighed about 8 ounces. And he didn't move very much because he was using all of his energy attempting to breathe. And I remember toward the end of his life, I couldn't tell if he was alive or not unless I held him up against the light to see if I could see his heart beating through his chest wall because their skin is so thin at that age. And the feelings of helplessness that I had so many years before of watching another little baby die came flooding back to me as once again I was in the same situation. There was nothing that I could do to save this little guy. And after he was pronounced dead, I folded his little arms across his chest. I tied them together with a little string. I wrapped him in a shroud, and I took him to the morgue where we took all of our other dead patients. After I held that baby, the weight of everything that I knew became too much for me to bear. I had two obvious choices. One was to leave the hospital, and one was to stay and fight. And while I was seeking counsel from my pastor, and thank God for godly pastors, and praying and searching scripture, I came up on a passage that I thought spoke directly to me, and it's Proverbs 24, 11, and 12. I'm sure it's familiar to many of you, and it says, "Rescue those who have unjustly been sentenced to death. Don't stand back and let them die. Don't try to disclaim responsibility by saying that you didn't know about it. For the Lord who knows all hearts knows you knew, and he will reward everyone according to his deeds." I see some of you pulling out pens. Proverbs 24, 11, and 12. So I thought, those were my marching orders. I was called to stay and fight when I knew what was going on there. So I wrote a letter to the religious leaders of the hospital because I couldn't believe they knew what was going on in the labor and delivery department at just a couple of floors over their heads. And as a result of my letter, I was called in for a meeting with my department superiors. And they told me that they thought induced labor abortion was the most compassionate way to abort because this method of abortion allowed parents to have closure on the death of their baby because they got to see their baby die and breathe properly. They also said that this was the most compassionate way for the baby to be aborted because this method of abortion allowed the baby to be held until the baby died, rather than be suctioned or dismembered as with other methods of abortion. And my bosses told me it would be a shame to lose me, but I might be better suited at another hospital that was more in line with my pro-life convictions. But I told them I wasn't going to leave. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew that I hadn't done enough to try and stop what was going on there. So next, my pastor and I alerted a couple of influential people and organizations and asked them to appeal to the hospital, and they did. Dr. C. Everett Koop, former Surgeon General of the United States under President Reagan, Cardinal Francis George, but appeals such as this had no impact on the hospital. They said they weren't going to stop. And so as he told them he was going to do, they didn't stop. My pastor in July of 1999 wrote a letter to some 70 churches and pro-life organizations in the Chicago area and around the country, letting them know what Christ Hospital was up to. And it was my pastor's letter that kind of triggered all of the public outcry that went on after that. Before I knew it, the story was in Newsweek and the New York Times and on the O'Reilly Factor and Hanny and Combs, and I was being interviewed from one end of the country to the other. And as I said, it turned out that induced labor abortion is not rare. Invariably, wherever I speak, whenever I would be on the radio, talk to some people long enough or receive enough calls, somebody will come up to me or somebody will call in and they'll say to me, "Jill, it's going on in my hospital." Well, in April of 2000, according to God's perfect timing of events, a bill that had been in the works for some 12 years on the federal level called the Born Alive Infants Protection Act came to fruition in the United States Congress. Someone saw the day coming when abortion would leave the uterus. And we would be now talking about infanticide. And they devised this bill. It was very simple, just 3 sentences long. And it defined what it means to be a legal person in the United States. It said any baby born alive, no matter what gestational age, no matter what reason for being born, wanted or not, is a constitutionally protected person. That's all that bill said. But would you believe And I've heard legislators argue this. My own state senator, Barack Obama, arguing that they thought that if a mom terminated her pregnancy and somehow the baby survived the first attempt to kill him or her, that mom should be allowed to say that baby be killed on the other side of the uterus. Father Levone calls it fourth trimester abortions. That's where we're at now, 36 years after legalized abortion. I've been asked to testify some 9 times now on the federal level and in various states regarding babies who I knew were aborted alive at Christ Hospital. And what I told the legislators under oath and what I'm going to be telling you today, Christ Hospital has never publicly stated that what I'm saying isn't true because it can't. I told the legislators about a support associate who told me that she accidentally threw one of these live aborted babies into the trash. She didn't realize the baby was wrapped in a disposable towel next to the sink in the soiled utility room and accidentally threw the baby away. And after she was going through the trash attempting to retrieve the baby, she accidentally dropped the baby on the floor. I told the legislators about what a nurse coworker relayed to me of aborting a baby who was supposed to have spina bifida, but the baby actually was completely fine. And what happened was, in these old, grainy two-dimensional ultrasounds, the gray ones that you see, and you can't really tell what's what, there was an incomplete twin in the placenta. And on ultrasound, this incomplete twin looked like a mass on his brother's back. But there was actually nothing wrong with this other little guy. He was completely healthy. And the mom and the dad who were aborting were both doctors. And my friend said that the dad came into the soiled utility room after what he thought was the abortion of his handicapped son. And he saw that he'd just given permission to abort his completely healthy boy. And she said he didn't say a word. He turned and he left the room silently. And I find this incident particularly poignant because it points out that abortion just doesn't kill children. And abortion just doesn't maim and kill our girls and women. But abortion has a profound impact on men too. I'm sure some men in this room today. Because I don't think that this guy went back to his wife's room and told her what he knew to increase her guilt and her shame even more. I'm sure that this is something that he lives with by himself to this very day, as so many men do. I told the congressman about another situation that a nurse said to me, "I can't stop thinking about it, Jill." She was involved in the abortion of a baby who was just over 23 weeks old, or just viable. The normal pregnancy is 40 weeks, and the American Heart Association says that you can resuscitate a baby at 23 weeks and or 1 pound. This baby was there. But the mom wasn't going to be able to complete her pregnancy to term. And since she was at a hospital that offered choices, they said to her, "Do you want to deliver a baby in distress or do you want to abort?" And she said, "Well, I want to abort." Now, if she wanted everything done for her baby, a team of 4 specialists would have been sent over from the neonatal unit at delivery to care for this little girl. But because she wasn't wanted, the only people present at her delivery was my nurse friend and an OBGYN resident. And this little girl was aborted alive. And she began breathing on her own. And amazingly, her APGAR scores improved between 1 and 5 minutes, meaning she began showing signs of thriving all by herself without any help whatsoever. But nothing was done for her. She was just kept in the department and rocked for the 2.5 hours that she lived. I had a coworker, Allison Baker, who testified with me in Washington about what she saw at Christ Hospital. And she testified that one time she walked into the soiled utility room to find a live aborted baby laying naked next to the sink, and wants to find a live aborted baby laying naked on the scale. And she said that she herself once inherited a patient, a change of shift, who aborted her baby alive and didn't want anything to do with him. And so while Allison was running back and forth, caring for her 2 patients, one in the soiled utility room, one in a nice room with a bed and a TV, she said every time she would go into the mom's room, the mom would say to her, "Is he dead yet? Is he dead yet?" Well, in the midst of all the congressional testimonies that were going on by this time, and prayer vigils and pickets at the hospital. I continued to work there for another 2 years after I went public. I didn't like staying there, but every time I thought about leaving, Isaiah 8:18 kept coming back to me, and it says, I will wait with hope for the Lord. I am here with the children that the Lord has given me. I do not think that there can be any such thing as coincidence. If the Bible says it, that not a sparrow falls from the sky without his knowing it, and that all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord, then we are all at this moment in time for a reason. You are where you are for a reason. You are in this geographical location for a reason. We may not understand sometimes the reasons for the troubles that we go through, but God never promises us we'll understand why these trials keep happening. But He promises, He says to us to believe He's a good God all the time and have faith in Him. In fact, Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble. It's a guarantee. So I submit if we pro-lifers are going through this life and we're not wanting to make waves, we're not wanting to be known as a dreaded right-wing extremist, I wonder how effective of a witness can we really think that we are? Because I thought my duty was not only to be a witness to people on the inside, but to be a witness to people on the outside and let you know how horrible abortion has gotten. I watched and I listened very carefully for those 2 years that went by before I was fired, and I heard many heartbreaking incidences. One nurse friend told me about an aborting patient that she had who didn't realize that her baby could be aborted alive. So she was not only hysterical when the baby came out alive, but also because the baby didn't appear to have the external defects that she'd been told he was going to have, which was why she was aborting. So she screamed for someone to help her baby, and my friend ran over to the unit and grabbed the neonatologist, and he came rushing back, and he looked at the baby, and he had to look the mom in the eye and say to her, there's nothing I could do for your son because he was born too soon. And the mom was so traumatized, she had to be tranquilized. And it was left up to this little guy's grandmother, grandmother's, imagine this, to rock her grandson for the only half hour that she would ever spend with him. I've been further shocked at the depths that some people will go to, people who call themselves Christians, to protect and defend abortion. Yep. In December 2000,